Assalamu alaikum students, welcome to your course, welcome to another lecture on TOEFL 2. Alright students, before we start this lecture, I want to review the previous lectures that we had so far. Remember? Yes, I hope you all have revised the previous lectures. Fine, particularly the lectures and the handbook that you have. Alright? Okay, so dear students, we are talking how to teach what? How to teach a foreign language, because our course is on TOEFL, and this semester, you know, we are in fact going in detail. We are talking about things in depth, and that's why our focus is on micro teaching. Fine, and in the last lecture, that was lecture number 10, we talked about what? You see? Yes, that we talked about how to have a structured conversation and how to have an unstructured conversation. Then we talked about which? Yes, discussion, how to have discussion in the class. And we talked about pyramid discussions. Fine. And in this way, we talked about different stages of pyramid discussion. We saw that in the stage 1, just information is given. In the stage 2, again, like the pyramid moves, so we had to squeeze the group members, and students have to decide on some items. Similarly, in the third stage, further, right, the groups have to work together, and they had to agree on certain number of items. And then we talked about what? Different statements for conversation structures. You see, and while talking about those structures for conversation, we talked about modifying. Now, what is modifying? In this method, we saw that students are expected to modify the given statement, right? And how do they modify? Students had to think over it. Students had to give their views, give their interpretations, and then, of course, they were allowed to modify the given statement. The next method was sequencing, right? Even the name shows that students had to put some points in a sequence. But definitely, how do we put things in a sequence? We had to keep in mind what priorities, that on which priority, on which ground we are putting things in order. And then we talk about defending, right? In this method, what happens, students? Yes, again, we give a topic, a debatable topic to our students, and we expect their arguments for the topic or against the topic. So in other words, we can call it a debate, right? So in debate, what happens, students? Students, in fact, when you give this topic to your students in the class, so they give their arguments for the statement, or they may give their arguments against the statement. So if a student gives arguments for the statement, so, and if he feels more, if he is more convincing, right, or if he gives concrete arguments, if he uses his body language well, right, so on one hand, he learns how to argue, how to give arguments for a proposition, for a given statement. So again, the point is, when you give arguments for or against, students improve their persuasive skills, right? So again, persuasion, they learn how to persuade, and they learn how to persuade in the target language, so in the language that they are learning, or in our case, in English language. Similarly, the students on the other side, fine, the students who speak against the given statement, so what they have to do, they have to speak against it, and they have to say why it is not possible. If I give you example, that you see, if the topic is that co-education should be allowed, right, in our colleges, in our schools, or in our universities, or in other words, at all levels of our educational system. So this can be a topic, right? So here maybe half of the class would speak for the co-education, that yes, co-education gives confidence to the students, and co-education help both the boys and girls to work together for different projects, and ultimately they have to live their life. So this can be a training phase for both the genders to know one another, right? And if you see the people who have never been to this system, so for them it becomes difficult to know the nature of the opposite gender. So once they in fact step into their practical life, they find it hard, they find it difficult. So people who support co-education, or the proponents of co-education, supporters of co-education, they feel that co-education prepares students for their lifelong activities. On the other hand, students who speak against the co-education, they talk, of course, they give certain religious interpretations, religious definitions, that religion is against co-education, or this is an age which is not mature, right? And students, the chances are there that they may in fact move away from their values. So they are against the co-education. So in this way, the topic was, we call it a defending method, where students learn how to argue, how to speak for, or how to speak against a given statement. So in this way, at times, the good thing of this method is that they forget, you see, because they had to give arguments, fine. And for this argument, students work together, they work in groups, right? And they have to think. So again, thinking is involved in this defending method, because they have to think and give arguments. And of course, when one part of the class in fact gives arguments for, the other part of the class gives arguments against it. So again, it's a two-way process, and they give arguments and counter arguments. So this is really good for the students' language one, because this language, I would say, of course, at an advanced level language is there, where they learn how to give arguments, and they think a lot, fine. When they think of language exponents to be used. When they think of different arguments. When they think how to give, how to use, emotional appeals to convince your audience. So this is a really good method, that in the long run, of course, if you talk about the career of the students, so finally they have to argue. In an interview, for example, the candidate argues the interviewer that he is the best candidate for the job. So this defending method is really a good method, where you learn how to use your body language, right, to make your reader understand your viewpoint, and you try to see how your para-language can help you out. So these were the things that we talked about in the last lecture, that how can we have this what conversation styles, what is a structured conversation, where a structure is provided to the students, and of course they are expected to explore, to exploit that, the method for the language learning process. So this one was our last lecture. Let's come to today. In fact, we are talking about classroom teaching activities, and today we'll talk about one of the very important activities, that is role plays, right? Now there is an image, of course, you can see that, and if I ask you what comes to your mind after seeing this image, so the title is what? Role play, fine. So with this uniform, right, and there are rules have been given, there are name tags, and there are 5 students, fine, they are having different characters, and there is a person, of course, the 6th student, also he is in uniform. So there is that the rule, these students have been allocated, they have been given different rules, and they are acting as per their roles, right? So in the roles, the point, if you see the name tags, one of the role play is maybe, of course, he's acting as a driver. Another is, of course, acting as a conductor. Another, of course, acting as a passenger. So different roles have been given to these students. They have been tagged with these different names, and there is a person, of course, he is inquiring, right? He asks questions and different roles reply as per their own, context and considering their role, of course. And this role play can be, in fact, a pre-planned. It can be provided in the presentation stage. So of course, in the production stage, students are expected to have their own rules. Remember that stages? Yes, the first stage was presentation stage, then of course practice stage, and then of course production stage. So in presentation stage you present, fine. In practice stage you make students practice in a controlled environment, and finally you make environment for the students to produce. So this role play, in fact, this image helps you, in fact, in knowing that what is this activity, why it is useful, and how we can exploit it. So what is a role play, right? Even the role, you know, the roll call, right? Roll number. But here we have what? A role play, right? So what is role play? Is in speaking activity when you either put yourself into somebody else's shoes, or when you stay in your own shoes but put yourself into imaginary situation. I mean, this is of course an activity, fine, activity where speaking activity, what happens, in which you put yourself into a shoes of another. I mean, in other words, you take place of, for example, a travel agent, or you take place of for example, a professor. So here, what you do in this activity, of course, in the role play, you either put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Is that clear? You put yourself in somebody else's shoes, or when you stay in your own shoes, you put yourself in an imaginary situation. So this could be one, right? In simple words, what I mean to say, my dear students, that you see, you in fact act like a travel agent, means you are putting yourself in a travel agent's shoes. So this means that sometimes the students imagine themselves as of course as per the roles they are given. They can imagine themselves as doctors, as professors, as lawyers, as shopkeepers, fine. So the joy of role play is that students can become anyone they like for a short time. I mean, this is a very good thing, because when you ask students in the class that what do they want to be, and of course some of the students would say they want to be teachers, some of the students would say they want to be lawyers, they want to be business persons. So again, that this is a chance, this is an activity for the student that they can act out the personality they want to be. Some of them want to be singers, some of them want to be actors. So this is the high time for a language learning students, that they can act out the roles of their own choice. So this gives what? A sense of happiness to the students, right? So they become happy, fine, that they are performing a role that they want to be in their life, right? The president, the queen, a millionaire, a pop star, the choice is endless. If you want to be the president of Pakistan, you can act out like a president of Pakistan. If you want to be a prime minister, so in that language learning activity, in role play, you can be Nawaz Sharif, you can be, the person you want to be, right? So here, you have endless choices. You can take a role of whosoever you want to, right? This is, of course, a benefit. And students can also take on the opinions of someone else, right? Of course, because you see, when you talk, when you are in a role play, so you have to take on the opinion of others for and against. In a role play, yes, you have to argue. You can take an opinion for, or you can take against, right? Debates can be used, and the class can be split into those who are expressing viewers in favor and those who are against them. Simple, right? If you see the slide, it shows that you have an opportunity to take a role of your choice, one, and again you can take an opinion, of course. You can speak for, or you can speak against the role play, right? You can speak for example, on one hand there is in fact a criminal, and of course there is an inspector, the police inspector, so they, of course, they can have a dialogue. And if you feel, for example, if you want to show the corruption in the police department, so over there you can show that as well. Or if you want to show corruption, of course, from another sector of the society, so you can show that, provided you are mentally mature to have your view, right? And then again, there could be imaginary situations. Functional language for a multitude of scenarios can be activated and practiced through role plays, right? Because when you imagine a situation, right, you imagine a context, right? So of course you have to speak in that imaginary world, and which is really a true acid test for your language learning. Because you see, if you talk in a day-to-day situation and you don't change your situation, then you may have, of course, you may be repeating things. However, if you think of a situation, you can keep an imaginary situation in mind, and of course you have to think in that imaginary situation, in that world. Fine. So if you think in that world, if you think in the imaginary world, so naturally, you see, you improve your language. And students, definitely they have to think, they have to keep the context in mind, and they keep on choosing the appropriacy, in fact, right, appropriate expression for that particular situation. And obviously, of course, that is what language learning at the restaurant, for example, checking in at the airport, looking for lost property, are all possible role plays. There can be thousands of role plays, right? So every situation, you are out, you see there is an argument between two students of the class, it can be a role play. You see there is an argument between a boy and a girl, and of course university, it can be a role play. You can see an argument between a conductor and a driver, of course it can be a role play. Or you see, a conflict, fine, between a passenger and a conductor, like we see every day in our public transport. So every situation can be role played, in fact, can put in that role play activity. And the good thing is that, of course, students, learn more. And if you take roles, of course, these role plays from your local environment, so obviously students would take more interest in that, because they would be knowing much about those role plays. Like I gave you 5-6 examples, and if you use one of these role plays in the class, so you would say that people would give feedback. Every day the students commute, they have to travel in public transport, so and they face these problems, right? And of course maybe in the class where there are students who have been abroad, so then they can give examples of that transport system, right? So they can give example of subway, they can give example of course the buses in abroad, right? So then we can compare and contrast that what are the loopholes in our transport system and what are the good points in the, of course, the other transport system. For example, metro bus, in fact, you see, so over there, or even still people give example of metro police in Pakistan, that you see motorway police, of course, is really effective, and a very of course decent way they deal with these transporters, with the drivers and all these things. So people really look up to them. Now the question is, why use role plays? Again, it's important that we see what is role play a while from now, that why, what is the significance of role play? If I ask you the question, can you answer without seeing the slides? Do you have any opinion? Do you have any answer? Yes, try. Role plays give you confidence. Fine, agree. Because in a role play, when you come in front of the class, right, and you act out that role, obviously you gain confidence, fine, and maybe your hidden skills come out. At times, if you do not come in front of the audience, you may not know what are your hidden qualities, what do you have in fact, fine. But once you come, once you dig yourself, fine, you explore yourself, So what happens? You come to know the real talent that you have. And many a times it happens that the students are brimming with potential, they have talent, fine, but they cannot perform, right? So there can be many reasons. One of the reasons can be that they were never given a chance, like I have seen many students, right? So they were given chance in their college life and they excelled in debating society, right? They became excellent speakers and they competed at university level. Of course, even they represented, of course, their provinces and finally the country as well. Initially, these people were of the view that they could not speak, right? So that's why, of course, when you come in front of the audience and you see audience, people see you, right? Judges see you, and then you see your real talent comes out. Jungle mein mor nacha, kisne dekha? Of course, that's why that if you have something and if you don't show it to others, you cannot, in fact, of course, gain sympathies. You cannot be in the limelight. So that's why, of course, in the role play, really, why we use role play, like you said, that it gives confidence. Fine. Why? Because you see, while acting out, you see that of course, what are your strengths as far as oral skills are concerned, what are your good points as far as acting is concerned. So these things come out, people see you once you perform an activity. For example, you see, I mean, you have a singer inside, but how that singer would come out unless you perform in a concert. So definitely for that singer come out, for that debater to be out, you have to show, right? Particularly, of course, to a large number of audience. And you see, you know the examples that sometimes it happens in school life. In our school system, there is no environment, and some students they have potential to be debater, but they cannot encash the strength that they have, right? Many of times the student belong to very far-flung area, but I mean he comes out and he performs. So therefore, why use role plays, right? We agree that learning takes place when activities are engaging and memorable. Yes, it's a good point. That you see, when you engage your students in an activity which is what engaging, because a role play engages students, right? They find it an enjoyable activity, and if they find it a memorable activity. Like still, of course, I did my master's in 2002, so still I remember that activities our teacher used to have in that class, though it was a master's class, it was not a language class, but still the TEFL teacher, she tried to, in fact, use that language teaching environment in the class. So we still remember. So the point is that you see, in the role play activities become, of course, everlasting for the students, and they never ever forget that. And whenever they meet after years, after ages, so they can quote that activity that they had in the class. Still I remember, of course, you see that the students who did their certificate or diploma in 1997, 1998, whenever they sit together and they have a chat, so they refer to Sir Qazi Iqbal in the department of FC. So his, in fact, method of the teaching, or the way he, in fact, managed students in the class in that department, so people still give examples. So therefore, these activities, these role plays, they become everlasting. And it is fun and motivating, of course, because language learning is, some say that it's a fun learning, of course, and if it's a fun, learning would be more. If it is a serious activity, so that cannot be a real success for a language learning class. So for a language learning class, environment should be lively. It should not be a serious and, of course, sad environment where the learners, in fact, have a fear to say something. Like it happens in some the classes, the teachers come in the class and they have a grim and, of course, a moody personality, and they don't even laugh in the class, and they feel if they laugh, maybe it's against their personality. So that class, of course, the students, sometimes they see their watches. In fact, the moment the class is over, they take a sigh of relief. So it is not the requirement for a language class. In a language class, what happens that you see, the environment should be fun, and that is in the role play, we see it happens. It maximizes students' talking time. Because in a role play, of course, either it is demonstration or it's a real activity. Students, in fact, what? They in fact talk more, and which is the requirement, that the student must be talking more than the teacher in the class, right? And even the quieter students get the chance to express themselves in a more forthright way, you see. So because in a role play, individually at times you find it difficult to perform. It happens in a class that you see some students maybe find it difficult to perform individually. But in a role play, of course, in a team when you work, so you come out of your shell and you try to in fact speak. So quieter students can also help themselves. And the world of the classroom is broadened to include the outside world, thus offering a much wider range of language opportunities. Yes, because I told you that there's imaginary world as well. You imagine as if you are in aerospace. You imagine as if you are, of course, in a country where you have never been, right? So that's why your horizon increases, right? In addition to these reasons, students will at some point travel to an English-speaking country, fine, or given a chance to rehearse their English in a safe environment. So again, they can imagine themselves in UK, they can imagine themselves in Australia, or in a country of their choice. Real situations can be created and the students can benefit from the practice. Of course, the context is important, the situation is important, right? So what happens, my dear student, that you see in this role play, of course, you can take students, you can make them imagine in a world where they want to be. You can make them imagine in a place where they want to be. You can imagine, you see, you can help them go out in all these activities. So it's a fun, it's an opportunity for the students to be where they want to be, right? Of course, it's an imaginary world. So in the imagination, you can do whatever you want to, right? Shy students can also benefit from group activity. Like I said earlier, some students are quiet. They don't say right at times, and some are shy, you see. So the shyness is overcome, and also if the students are quiet, they come out of that problem, you see. So that's why we use role play. In simple words, the role play is an activity where students come out of their shells. Shy students, they start contributing, quieter students come out. It's a fun activity. In fact, they can imagine themselves in a world of their own choice, in a personality of their choice, so all that. Now, there are some tips. Of course, definitely you will be using role play in your language, the classes. What are the points, strategies to be kept in mind for what? Successful classroom role play. First of all, prepare for success. Preparation is the key. Right? If you prepare well for the role play, you would manage it well. But if you are not, it's the other way around. So preparation is the key. The role plays is possible at elementary level, providing the students have been thoroughly prepared, in fact. So again, it's important, right? That preparation on the teacher's part, and of course, you can guide the students so that they would prepare themselves mentally and physically. Try to think through the language students will need and make sure the language has been presented. In the presentation stage, of course, when you are going to have a role play, right, in the practice stage or in the of course the production stage, so you need to know that which kind of language exponent, language items students need for this role play, and those language items, those vocabulary items, those sentence structures should be presented in the presentation stage. Again, it's important. Students may need the extra support of having the language on the board. Yes, I mean, if the student is struggling, because sometimes you feel that these are the language items that they would be using, fine, but again, you cannot restrict them to that language item. They would be thinking of more. So again, you have to come out and help the students out, take all the students on board. So I recently did a lost property office role play with elementary adults, right? Again, here I mean, for example, lost and found. Example is given, in fact. So, I mean, when we spend time beforehand drilling the students, in fact, for who would need to use. Well, students, so what happens, you see, in a role play, of course, you have to see the level of the students. Elementary students, in fact, need what? The language items that they would be using in that role play. Fine, and these language items, teacher, they present, they may write on the board, fine, in the presentation stage. However, advanced level students, fine, we expect that once you talk off, they would think of the language for it, and they can maneuver the situations more confidently. It is important. Okay, so now, of course, next thing is the role of the teacher. So dear students, in this, the role play activity, the teacher becomes a facilitator, he becomes a spectator, also a participant. There are three roles of a teacher in this role play activity. He facilitates students, may need new language to be fed in by the teacher. If rehearsal time is appropriate, the feeding in of a new language should take place at this stage. Is that clear? This is important. Fine. That, of course, you facilitate the students, and whenever they need, you need to feed in language. Fine. Wherever you feel that the students are struggling or they are looking for something, the teacher comes forward and he takes the students out of that crisis, out of that problem. So he facilitates students. In fact, of course, whenever they need help, the teacher comes forward and he becomes a what? Facilitator, also spectator. Fine. The teacher watches the role play and offers comments and advice at the end. Yeah, of course, it doesn't mean that the teacher only facilitates, he also becomes spectator. Right? So the teacher watches, right, like spectator, like in fact viewers. So he views and he comes forward and he helps out wherever he finds a problematic area. So he pinpoints that area and he helps as per his experience, so that the students would have a better role play activity. And then, of course, at times he participates, right? It is sometimes, of course, appropriate to get involved and take part in the role play yourself. I mean, particularly in the beginning, where you feel that the students may not be more participative, more expressive in a role play, so the teacher can jump in, right? Because he has experience, of course, he's an experienced teacher and he has done many role plays, so he can jump in, he can plunge in that activity, and then of course he participates, he may take a role, of course. So that role again gives to confidence to, in fact, other students, and they start working on it. And if there are different groups in the class working on different role plays, so the teacher needs to participate in all the four role plays which are going on in the class. So that's why, my dear students, you see, when talk about the role of the teacher is what? Facilitator, teacher is spectator, teacher is a participant. These things you must keep in mind when you are having the role play activity in the class, that it is not that you see you just stand alone. No, you, the teacher, in this role play activities, generally we feel that the teacher should participate, he should facilitate, or he should be spectator. These are what we call it, the role of the teacher is there. Now the next thing is, of course, the tip that you can, need to keep in mind is bring situations to life. Very important. Realia and Pops can really, of course, bring a role play to life, right? A group of course, my young learners recently played the roles of pizza chef and customer, right? So that brings situations to life. And we discussed earlier that, of course, in role play, real life situations can be exploited, right? Like we see here, of course, a chef and what? And a customer, right? You can go to KFC, you can go to Pizza Hut, you can go to McDonald's, and over there, you see, we can see those roles. And for this one, definitely an activity can be given to the student that please visit McDonald's, visit KFC, visit in fact, of course, Nirala Sweet, visit Savor Food and see what's going on, right? So being a language teacher, this activity can be given, right? That just observe, fine, and that would bring a real life situation, and once the students observe, they can bring that observation in the class, and in the class, the language learning class, we can act out the situation, right? And every day, of course, students visit different departmental stores, they visit different banks, different hospitals. So, I mean, you can think of as many role plays as you want to. If there are 15 students in the class, and of course, on average, if 10 students have visited, for example, different places in last week, so they had things in their mind, and they would help in writing, of course, they would help in holding that role play successfully. So that's why the real situations, if they are brought, they can be managed well. So rearranging the furniture can also help, in fact, because once you have a role play, you have to keep in mind that of course arrangement of chairs are important, that whatever resource you are available, so you have to manage the role play in a given situation. You can put chairs in order, fine. You can have a chair for the chairperson if it is a meeting going on, fine, right? Or if you can bring some charts, you can bring that, or if you bring some name tags, you can bring that, if you have a space problem. So if you're imagining you are at the tourist information or a doctor's surgery, try to make it as real as you can. For example, you can bring a chart where there's a doctor, there is a stat, and there is a white coat that shows you are in hospital, and then there is an emergency, of course. You can bring a chart with an ambulance. So these things show that student can even leave the room and make an entrance by knocking on the door. Yes, for the role play, you can send students out, they can come in. Or ideally, if you have resources, you can take students to a situation. For example, taking students to a hotel for a room reservation, or taking students to a restaurant for lunch, fine. So again, this bring reality in life. Or taking students to a grocery store, taking students to a veggies, in fact. So these real situations make learning a fun, right? And they learn in that particular rules. So therefore, this is a very important tip that brings situations to life in the role plays. Next important strategy for the role play activity is keep it real and relevant, right? So again, real mean that it's realistic. Be realistic in that. Don't exaggerate things. Fine. Realism is a must, and then relevant to the, of course, language item that we are teaching to our students. So try to keep the rules. You ask students to play as real life as possible, fine, because how a housewife in fact behaves, if there is a role play between a housewife and, of course, and a banker, or a role play between a mother, who is a working lady and what her maid. So again, the real life is important, and they should be relevant as well. It may be hard for students who have little opportunity to travel to imagine they are in, for example, your old teacup shop, right? Maybe, of course, sometime you give examples and they have never, for example, chai khana, of course. Maybe some of the students have never been there, of course, if they come from the areas, if they are not from Islamabad. So people who are from Islamabad, they know about roasters, they know about Hardee's, they know about McDonald's, and they know about F9 Park and all that. So for them, these things would be common. But for somebody who has here for the first time, in your city for the first time, so definitely for him it would be difficult. Fine, Vache? So that's why you see that you have to be relevant, and if you feel that there's a situation and you need to explain it for those who have of course no exposure of that, and again how you make it clear, because without hurting in fact anybody, without making anybody embarrassed, generally you can discuss, considering that, of course, the weakest link in the classes. So students working in the business world may find it easy to role play. Yes, for people on job, role plays are easy to do. However, for the students, in fact, for the fresh students, and for those who have never, in fact, been to a system, it's a new system for them. So they initially find it a bit tough, but slowly and gradually they would overcome the problem, and slowly and gradually they would be part of the team. However, for on-job people, role plays are easy to do because they have their vision is broadened, in fact, and they have more exposure. They can have that role play in a better way. So this is what, for example, if you you are working in a company and you have to hire a car from a rent-a-car. So again, being a coordinator, you can call and get information. So this can be a role play. And here what you are teaching them how to dial the number, how to greet somebody, how to reply to greetings, and how to ask for what? Car information, how to know about the car models, in fact, and how to talk about the chef facility, and how much they cost for a day, and what is the cost for a corporate organization, so the corporations, in fact. So in this way, try to keep it real and relevant. Another tip, my dear students, is for successful classroom role play is feed in language. Like I told you earlier, that feed in language is language that you provide to the students, give the students, in fact, right? So as the students practice the role play, they might find they are stuck for words and phrases, right? In practice stage, the teacher has a chance to feed in, mind you, in practice stage, because it's a control activity, find the appropriate language. This may need the teacher to act as a sort of walking dictionary, fine, and then monitoring the class and offering assistance as and when necessary, fine. If you are not happy doing this and you feel that the process of finding the new language should offer more students autonomy, you could have a time out after the practice stage for the students to use dictionary to look up and what they need. Again, this is a problem. That feed in language can be that, of course, you should work like a walking dictionary, fine, and you visit different groups and help them whenever they need a word, or sometime you want students to help themselves, so you can ask them, find, you allow them for code switching, and once they complete the activity, you direct them to look up the word. And the teacher who do this activity, they feel that this gives more confidence to the students because they struggle in that role play, and if they are provided that word, so they might forget it. But if they are not provided that word while that activity is going on, so once they would finish the activity and they would consult dictionary, so retention would be more, fine. So there are different views, and some teachers, in fact, they want to feed in language the students, right? So the role of a teacher, section of some is feeding in the language students need is fundamental, fine. I told you earlier that teacher is facilitator, teacher is, of course, he participates, right, and also teacher at times, in fact, he helps the students. By doing this, they will learn new vocabulary and structures in a natural and memorable environment. It is a chance to use real and natural language, right? Because in the role play, of course, it's more natural, because in our day-to-day life, we work, in fact, we perform activities in different role plays. So that's why, you see, the teacher, of course, what he does, that he feeds in language. And how he feeds in language, it depends. He can provide that language item during the activity, or once the activity is over, he asks students to look up the word or that sentence structure from different sources. Another important point is that as far as this role play is concerned, error correction. Now, what is error correction? How to correct errors, fine. There are many ways to correct mistakes when using role play. It is really appropriate for the teacher to jump in and correct every mistake. I mean, again, because we talked about earlier that when to correct errors, right? You need to be very careful while correcting errors. Again, you need to see who is the person, of course, what is his level, in fact, what is his age, in fact, his understanding level, his in fact background, and all that. I mean, you cannot correct the students there and then. It's difficult for you if there are 4 groups are working in a class. So it's hard, it's difficult for the teacher. So the teacher may not do that. This can be incredibly demotivating if you correct students there and then. And it is generally believed that if you correct the students while he speaks, so he might not speak in future, right? So let the students speak, in fact, and maybe at the end, whenever you find opportunity, time, you can do that. Some students do not like to be corrected straight after a role play activity while the language is still fresh in their minds. Sentences with errors can be written on the board for the group to correct together. Yes, again, if you write a sentence on the board, and students would realize, and that everybody would realize. If you correct the students in front of his class fellows, so at times it might demotivate the students. So the teacher, of course, of the foreign language, in the role play particularly, need to be very careful for correction, right? They need not to correct the students there and then. They should hold on, they should wait, they should be calm to correct them. Self-correction, of course, again, it's important. If you have the equipment to record the role plays either on audio cassette or on a video, students can be given the opportunity to listen to the dialogue again and reflect on the language used. This may find it easy to spot their own mistakes. Again, it's very important. If you have this opportunity to record the voice, so they would listen and they would correct themselves. Or again, you can repeat the sentence of the students, and if it is a mistake, they would correct themselves. It's an error, they might not do so. So if in case of it is an error, you can write on the board, right? You can speak on that sentence. So that would in fact help the students. So again, it's very, very important. It's very, very important to correct, but how is very important. How you correct, again, is very important. This was, of course, a tip that you see while having a role play. The teacher should be considerate. They should facilitate in a best way, fine, so that role play activity would be a real success. Again, there's another correction, we call it peer correction. Self correction is there, of course, meaning you can record the voice, fine, okay, and play that voice and students would correct. Peer correction, of course, peer means the students at the same level. Of course, this can be a correction that can be done. Fine, the fellow students may be able to correct some mistakes made by their peers. Fine, and students could be asked to listen out for both, fine, great bits of language they would like to use themselves and some mistakes they hear. Be careful to keep peer correction a positive and profitable experience for all involved. Right? Again, it's a good thing, but you need to direct how peers should correct. How peer correction can be managed. That some students mind peer correction, but they do not mind teachers' correction. In fact, because sometimes it happens in a class, you see, the conflicts are there in a class. So teacher should try to remove all the conflicts. In fact, there should not be politics in the class. It happens sometimes that you see there are groups in the class, of course, and one group in fact tries to dominate the other group and others does the same. So in such situations, yes, that peer correction, of course it can be allowed, but it should be allowed, fine, in a reasonable way, fine. If there is politics in the class, right, there are groups in the class, fine, and particularly if there is co-education is there, so peer correction should be managed well, and the teacher should make it clear that, well, it's peer, of course, sake for the correction. And again, how peers should correct and when peers should correct, they need to wait. Fine, maybe a sentence is uttered, and if a quick peer correction comes, so that can demotivate the students. However, direct the class that, of course, if there is a mistake, wait for a while, maybe the student would correct himself. If he fails to correct, then the peers can be allowed to correct, and of course teacher can also in fact help out. Make a note of common mistakes yourself and dealing with them in future class. Again, it's important. Some teachers, in fact, when they mark papers, what they do, they keep on making a database of mistakes or the errors, of course. So once they show the paper to the students, or at the end of the exam, you see, once they want to see their results, so the teacher comes in the class and he discusses all the problems and generally discusses the common problems, right? So therefore, making a note of common mistakes is very important. It can help the students in the long run, and these mistakes of course definitely help students to overcome. So therefore, dear students, these are some ways of there for correction. It can be a self-correction, peer correction, or you can make a note of it, mistakes, and at the end you can discuss those common mistakes with the class. Another important tip is, my dear students, use your imagination and have fun, right? That of course in a role play, yes, the teacher needs to be imaginative, he needs to use his imagination. So is the case with the students, in fact. So give them this leverage that they need to imagine. Imagine the personality that they want to be. Imagine the place they want to live. So role of course imagination is important. The most successful role plays I did last year with a group of teenagers, and was used as a springboard activity after listening to a song, right? The song was Orwell's, right? Leving's, right? So the class worked in pairs to act out the scene of what? Skater boy finally getting to meet his ex-girlfriend after the concert. The results were humorous, and I was surprised that they really got into the role they played. So again, of course, this is one example, and you can have other role plays, for example. Like I personally feel that of course the culture can play an important role. If you want to have a role play, you can give examples. Of course, you can use tales from, of course, you can take tales of local folk. In fact, folk tales can be taken for the role play, and of course students have idea about those folk tales, and they can best be used for language teaching, right? So think of, you need to know about different tales and about different characters, and you see, brief the students, fine, and ask them to have that role play. Wherever you are teaching language, you're teaching language in Multan, you're taking language in, so when you're teaching language in Multan, so of course the hot weather can be reflected. You are teaching language in Abbottabad, the cold weather can be shown, in fact. So in this way, that whatever the folk tale is, whatever the culture of that region is, that can be shown in our role plays. That really helps. So role play can be a lot of fun. If you still feel reluctance to use it, right? Use it in the class. Some people say it's not difficult. I mean, it's fine. It's hard to use role play. No, it is really a fun, right? It makes people better, in fact. I suggest you begin to integrate it slowly, in fact. Why not? Fine. Extend an appropriate reading or listening from a course book. Again, the role plays are very important. I hope you understand. So dear students, that is what you see, that mind you, that role play, of course, they become fun for the students, fun, and they make students think of what different linguistic requirements, they think in a different situation. So obviously they're of course learning, they learn the language, and this becomes a real cherishable activity in the class, both for the teacher and for the learners. The learners leave the class with this, of course, with the fun note, and the teacher goes satisfied that at least the students have learned how to talk in a different situation. And this is what language is, because you cannot encapsulate language in a particular situation. Language, in fact, when you teach language, when you learn language, you prepare yourself for environment, right? Multicultural environment, multi-situations, right? For many situations, fine? So for this, what you do, that in the role play, you can bring as many situations in the class as you can, and that really helps the students, in fact. So now, what is suggested procedure for a role play? Fine, earlier we talked about that what is role play, why to use role play, fine, and there are tips for the role play. And now what is suggested procedure for the role play? So language input, setting of context, fine, and then allocation of roles, statement of what? The aim, familiarization with role, demonstration, role play, and achievement of aim, feedback, follow-up. Simple, right? This is the procedure that we have. The first, you give language input mean, you teach that language exponent, you present that language, and then of a context, which situation is there, right? It's a grocery store situation, or it's in a bank situation, or fine. And then allocation of roles. You allocate different roles, students, and then what is the statement of aim, in fact, right? Of course, the purpose, and then familiarization of the roles, that the students would be familiar with the roles, and then you can demonstrate, teacher can demonstrate initially, in fact, like he can participate and he can start, and then of course the role play comes in action, and then again there is what? A report back. You see, if you find that there is a problem in that, you can go back and see. At the end, of course, you have the follow-up says. So dear students, devising your own role plays, of course, is important. I mean, language teacher should be creative, right? A good language teacher keeps on, devising different roles. Fine. So here means when you devise role play, what to keep in mind? The language and the context. Which language item you are going to teach the students, which language item you want to, you want to exploit in the class, you want to help your learners, and what is the context? Again, the language and the context, they are complementary. Every context, in fact, demands a language item. So that's why these are complementary, and you need to keep in mind that what is the situation. The situation is very formal, so we expect a formal language. Situation is very informal, dialogue, so we can use that informal language there, right? So situation and the language. Then the roles, of course, which roles you are going to give the students. If you take roles from the local environment, it's fine, you can take the role, of course, of local environment. If you want to take roles from the international world, yes, when you teach language, so you can take roles, of course, from the culture of that language. You can take roles from the English environment. Possible, fine. However, local roles, some people prefer having local roles, but for the students who want to go abroad after that language class, after that language learning, so for them international roles again would help them know about that culture as well. Essential elements you should keep in mind, in fact, that which are the aims, right? That statement, of course, and then role information. Every role must. Every person must know about that role, that how should a policeman act, how should a customer act, how should a teacher act, fine. And then timing, of course, is important, right? These are, of course, when you devise a role, that how much time this role would last for. Would it last for 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 3 minutes? So timing is also important. What is the language and context and all that. All right. Why some teachers hesitate to employ roles play in the classroom? Yes, some people have problems. Say that students cannot be expected to act. They feel that it's difficult for the students to act. Yes, agree. Fine, the point. But at times, initially, it happens sometimes that they are not willing to act out. But you have to. Teacher has to create the situation. He has to motivate them, and they would definitely act out. Earlier I told you that, of course, some students, they have this potential hidden, but you see, through role plays that potential can come out. Lots of students are inhibited by the role playing. Yes, they are inhibited, fine. Mistake can be corrected when several groups are talking. So it's why some teachers feel that it's difficult to correct mistakes, because there are 4 groups are there. How would the mistake can be corrected? So yes, it can be done if you visit those 4 groups, and the common mistakes can be in fact put on a chart or on the whiteboard. It feels insecure or lacking in control when the teacher is no longer the focus of the class attention. Sometimes the teacher feels that a role play activity begins, and the teacher, of course, in fact, loses that focus. So this is not way. That's why some teachers, they feel that it's difficult. They are against role playing activity, but this can be addressed somehow in one way or the other. What about the role allocation problems? In fact, yes, sometimes students are not willing to take some roles, right? So again, you see, it is job of the teacher to make people realize the significance of roles, and thinking and giving an appropriate role. A serious student should be given a serious role, right? And of course, jolly students can be given a role of a joke. joker. So in this way, you see, you think, and then roles can be changed. In fact, it doesn't mean that a serious looking person should always be given a serious role. Sometimes he can be given a jolly role. In fact, example again, you can see a role is going on, right? This picture image. All right, so dear students, what, and this is a very important lecture, the classroom teaching activities, and today we talk about role play, right? The speaking activity, when you either put yourself in somebody else's shoes, or when you stay in your own shoes, and but you yourself, and you imagine yourself in an imaginary world, right? So that learning takes place when your activities are engaging and memorable, and this is fun. In role play we have this, of course. It's a fun learning because people take roles of their own choice. They in fact act out, right, the personalities of their choice. In fact, they become Shahid Afridi, they become in fact PCB chairman. So whatever role the students want to act out, they can be given that opportunity. They can change classroom environment. Again, it brings change in the class. So that change, again, it's a good way for language learning. And they can imagine in a world, in a country where they have never been, or they might not visit that country. So in that role play, they can imagine themselves in that way. And then how to use role plays, of course, we discussed that. You see, once you have the role play, of course, the allocation of roles are important, in fact, and what setting of roles is important. And why to use roles? Because it creates good environment for the language learning. And what is the procedure of role play? In fact, what is, see that, you see what language item you want to teach them, and then set the context. And other details are there as far as procedure is concerned. So some teachers are reluctant to have role plays. Why? Because they feel that students are not willing to act out, students are hesitant, they don't have acting skills. Fine. So the class becomes chaos and the teacher loses attention. So these are all the ways, but these can be addressed, provided the teacher in fact comes prepared in the class, provided the teacher knows the details about that role play, of course. So dear students, this is what a classroom activity is there, which is very important. And I would say that please see this activity, right, and then try to exploit in the class, of course, in your class, and see how it works, right? If it works, right, and what else can we do to improve it? Right, these activities we are talking about these days, the classroom teaching activities, so that to give you an idea that of course this language learning is a fun learning, of course, and how you can make it fun by incorporating these activities, like role play is one of those. And the role play, in fact, what I told you earlier, that see the canvas is large, in fact, right? You can ask students to bring situations from the real life, and you can act out those situations, right? And here, of course, the teacher's language is also important, because at times he has to work like a walking dictionary, that whenever the students struggle, so his input should be there, right? He feeds in language, right? So these are some of the points that you see you need to keep in mind as far as role plays are concerned, and think over what else can be done and how this activity improves your language teaching, right? You may have more ideas, right? You are brimming with knowledge, you're all young people. Do more research on the role play and see that how role plays can be done in the class, and if there are any loopholes, how can we overcome the loopholes, and above all, how to manage role play for the purpose, for the language teaching. With this, I say goodbye to all of you. See you in the next class.